Imagine you are driving to a coffee shop on a Tuesday afternoon, and it is not your usual spot.
Right, you chose neutral territory on purpose.
Exactly. A place where the baristas do not know your order, where you don't have a favorite chair, and definitely where there is zero chance of running into someone from your office.
Because you are going to meet an ex.
Yeah. And not just, an old college fling. We are talking about the one. The person who gave you the most passionate, cinematic, and ultimately destructive relationship of your entire life.
And I bet you're wearing an outfit that makes you feel totally armored.
Oh, 100%. It is calculated down to the accessories. You want to look effortlessly confident, completely unbothered, maybe even a little bit intimidating.
Naturally.
And you keep telling yourself you are gripping the steering wheel so hard your knuckles are turning white that you're just going for closure.
Ah, closure. That elusive, almost mythical concept.
Right, like something you both supposedly need to finally pack this chapter away. But as you pull into the parking lot and the gravel crunches under your tires, a very different physical reality takes over.
Your chest gets incredibly tight.
Yes, your breathing becomes super shallow, shifting from your diaphragm to just the top of your lungs. Your vagus nerve is sending these frantic signals to your brain, and your heart is just hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird.
Because your body is entirely hijacking the narrative your mind is trying to construct.
It really is.
I mean, you are attempting to intellectually manage a situation, but your autonomic nervous system has already recognized a massive threat. It's a profound, almost primal physiological reaction.
You're just flooding with cortisol.
Cortisol and adrenaline, literally before you even turn off the ignition.
And right there in the driver's seat, your internal monologue just starts spiraling. The rational part of your brain kicks in and asks, why are you really here?
Why put yourself through this, right?
Exactly. Why does this specific type of chaotic roller coaster dynamic feel so incredibly, undeniably magnetic? Because, you know your own history. You've given absolutely everything to relationships like this in the past.
This compromised your boundaries
Yeah.
over and over.
Yeah, twisted yourself into psychological pretzels just to be the perfect accommodating partner, silenced your own needs, only to end up standing in your bathroom maybe months or years later looking in the mirror and not even recognizing the exhausted, hollowed-out person staring back at you.
It's terrifying when that realization hits.
It is. And in that Tuesday afternoon parking lot, you wonder why love, which is, cultural advertised as this beautiful, nurturing, life-giving force, feels like an endless, grueling survival test.
Well, validating that specific confusion is exactly why we are unpacking this topic today.
I am so glad we are.
That feeling of being trapped in a psychological survival test when you're supposedly just looking for partnership. It was one of the most common, yet honestly least understood, modern human experiences.
And it's so isolating. You think you're the only one doing it.
Exactly. And more importantly, the premise of our exploration today is to prove that it is not your fault. Today, we are analyzing the invisible blueprints that actually dictate our romantic behaviors.
So we're looking at the root causes.
Right. We will trace the architecture of our desires all the way back to the historical and cultural conditioning we've been subjected to since childhood. Then, we'll look at the psychological mechanisms like the unhealed unconscious wounds that are actually selecting our partners for us.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And finally, we'll break down the structural mechanics of how to dismantle this programming so you can reclaim your authentic, unmasked self.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the analogy that keeps coming to mind as I review the research for today's exploration is basically technological.
Oh, I like that. How so?
Well, it feels like we are running a fundamentally malfunctioning software program in our brains when it comes to love and connection. But because we don't understand code, we just keep blaming the hardware.
That is a brilliant way to put it.
Right. We look at our repeated relationship failures, the exhaustion, the drawn-out breakups, and we conclude that we are inherently broken. We think our hearts are defective or that we are just fundamentally unlovable.
But the reality presented in the clinical literature suggests something entirely different. We are just operating on terrible, outdated code that someone else installed without our consent.
Exactly. And the critical misstep we make is that we rarely stop to audit that code.
No, we just accept our romantic impulses as fundamental truths of human nature. But to truly understand the origins of our romantic ideals, we really have to recognize a rather uncomfortable truth.
Which is what?
That we did not learn how to love from experiencing healthy, real-world relationships.
Oof. Yeah.
We learned the mechanics of romance much earlier through highly curated socialization. I mean, we absorbed it from childhood games, from the fairy tales read to us before bed.
The relentless looping of pop songs on the radio.
Exactly. And the overarching plot lines of blockbuster movies. We have been completely conditioned to pursue a very specific, highly manufactured version of romance that is, frankly, practically designed to fail.
So let's trace that conditioning, because I think the assumption for most of us is that the way we love today is just how humans have always loved forever.
Right, but the historical data totally shatters that illusion. The intense, dramatic obsession we call romantic love, it's actually a relatively modern historical construct.
Wait, really? How modern?
Well, if you look back to the 12th century in Europe, you uncover the true socio-cultural origins of this phenomenon. It actually started with traveling musicians and poets.
The troubadours, right?
Yes, the troubadours. They began formalizing a concept known as courtly love. And this is not about building a sustainable life with someone.
Yeah.
It was characterized by agonizing, unattainable longing.
So it was just about pining from afar.
Exactly. The classic trope was a knight pledging his undying, feverish devotion to a noblewoman who was almost always married to someone else of higher status.
Okay, so she was completely out of reach.
Completely. The entire framework was built on suffering, immense yearning, and the perceived nobility of enduring excruciating emotional pain for a distant, inaccessible affection.
So the suffering wasn't a byproduct of the love. The suffering was the actual proof of the love.
You hit the nail on the head. If you weren't agonizing, you weren't truly devoted. And obviously this had absolutely nothing to do with the actual institution of marriage at the time.
Because marriage back then was just a business deal, right?
Strictly an economic arrangement. In the 12th century, and for centuries after, marriage was a mechanism for political alliances, land consolidation, physical survival.
Just keeping the farm running.
Right. Romance and intense emotional fulfillment were considered entirely separate from the marital bond. They often occurred outside of it in these highly ritualized, unconsummated fantasies.
Okay, so how do we bridge the gap between night suffering in courtyards and our modern obsession with finding the one and, moving into a two-bedroom apartment together?
The shift really occurred alongside major economic and societal transformations. During the Industrial Revolution, the physical structure of society changed drastically.
People moving to cities, factories opening up.
Exactly. People migrated from agrarian communities to urban centers. And with that, the concept of individual autonomy and choice began to replace strict communal duty.
Oh, so you didn't just have to marry the blacksmith's son anymore.
Right. The idea slowly emerged that you should probably have some baseline affinity for the person you are legally bound to. But the true crystallization of our modern romantic ideal, the real pressure cooker version we live with today, that really solidified post-World War II.
The 1950 suburbia era, the white picket fence paradigm.
Exactly. Because after the unprecedented chaos and devastation of a global war, Western society craved extreme stability.
Understandably.
Governments and economies needed rapid population growth and predictable consumer units. So there was this massive, heavily propagated cultural push to establish the nuclear family as the ultimate human achievement.
And they enforced really rigid gender roles to keep that stable, right?
Strictly enforced as a stabilizing mechanism.
Right.
And suddenly, this pragmatic economic institution of marriage was completely rebranded.
Oh, I see where this is going.
It was no longer just about economics. It was suddenly tasked with being the sole container for all of your romantic, emotional, psychological, and social needs.
That's insane. You're taking a concept designed for distant, dramatic fantasy by 12th century poets and demanding that it survive the reality of paying a mortgage, raising toddlers, and figuring out who takes out the trash.
It is an impossible load for one relationship to bear.
And according to the psychological frameworks we are examining, this impossible standard birthed a set of pervasive toxic myths that we have just fully internalized, right?
Absolutely. We use these myths as the grading rubric for our own lives.
Yeah.
Which basically guarantees that we always feel like we are failing.
Well, let's break down the mechanics of these myths, starting with probably the most culturally ingrained one, the idea that opposites attract, which usually manifests as the whole bad boy or bad girl trope.
Right. The media constantly portrays high conflict dynamics, volatility, and glaring behavioral red flags as passion.
Right. If you're not fighting in the rain, is it even love?
Exactly. We are conditioned to seek out partners who are unpredictable, emotionally volatile, or completely unavailable because the narrative insists that this friction is the spark of true romance.
I mean, every coming-of-age story relies on this. The quiet, responsible protagonist is inevitably drawn to the reckless, emotionally damaged antagonist.
And the audience is totally conditioned to root for it.
We are. We're sold the idea that pure, unrelenting love can act as like a skeleton key to unlock a deeply traumatized person's hidden, sensitive core. But what is actually happening on a biological level is significantly more sinister, isn't it?
The biology here is fascinating and entirely deceptive. When you engage with a highly unpredictable partner, your nervous system is thrust into a chronic state of hyperarousal.
You're just constantly on edge.
Yes. You're operating in the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight. Your adrenal glands are pumping cortisol and adrenaline because you literally do not know if you are emotionally safe.
Like, will they text back? Will they be furious today or super affectionate?
Exactly. This uncertainty is a massive stressor. But then, when they finally do show a sliver of affection or consistency, your brain rewards you with a massive concentrated spike of dopamine.
Oh, wow. So it's intermittent reinforcement.
That's exactly what it is.
It's the exact same neurological mechanism that makes slot machines so addictive. The uncertainty of the reward actually heightens the dopamine release when the reward finally comes.
You got it. Intermittent reinforcement is recognized in behavioral psychology as the most powerful way to condition behavior. The unpredictability wires your brain to become addicted to the cycle of anxiety followed by relief.
And the tragic flaw in our programming is that we misinterpret that physiological panic as romantic chemistry.
We really do.
We feel the cortisol-induced nausea, the racing heart, the obsessive hypervigilance, and we think, wow, I am completely consumed by this person. This must be a profound soul connection.
When really we just mistake a highly dysregulated nervous system for true love.
Which means when we actually encounter healthy love, which offers consistency, emotional safety, predictability, our dysregulated brains often register it as boring.
Because there's no cortisol spike. The baseline for stimulation has been completely skewed.
That makes so much sense.
Which leads directly to the second pervasive myth, the concept of the soulmate, or the half-orange.
Oh, I hate the half-orange concept.
It's so damaging. This myth relies on the psychological premise that a human being, in their natural solitary state, is fundamentally incomplete.
Right. You are presented as a walking deficit, just a fraction of a person, until you locate this one specific, predestined individual who perfectly interlocks with your flaws and magically renders you whole.
The whole "you complete me" narrative. It sounds incredibly romantic on a movie screen, but structurally, it is a terrifying concept.
Because it dictates that my existence, my inherent value, isn't fully actualized until another human being validates it by choosing me.
From a clinical mental health perspective, it is a recipe for absolute disaster. Think about it. If your core belief is that you are only half a person, your tolerance for toxic behavior becomes virtually limitless.
Because leaving them would mean...
It wouldn't just mean a breakup. It would represent the annihilation of your own identity. You will endure profound mistreatment to keep your other half around.
Wow.
Furthermore, it places an unbearable, crushing burden on the partner. You are demanding that another inherently flawed, struggling human being act as your sole source of happiness.
The regulator of your self-worth.
Exactly, the missing piece of your psychological puzzle. It is mathematically impossible for one person to provide that. A healthy framework demands that you recognize yourself as a complete, fully formed entity on your own.
A completely whole system. I love that. Because that shifts the entire objective of dating from a frantic search for rescue to a process of addition.
Precise.
You aren't desperately looking for someone to plug a leak in your hull. You're looking for someone who has their own functioning ship so you can sail in the same direction.
That's a great analogy.
But what happens when the sea gets rough? I mean, that brings up the third destructive myth, which is the absolute belief that love conquers all.
This one is perhaps the most dangerous narrative of them all because it actively keeps people anchored in profoundly harmful situations.
It really does.
It posits that the sheer magnitude of your emotional affection can somehow overcome any structural, psychological, or behavioral obstacle.
So the implication is that if a relationship fails, it's a personal moral failure.
Right.
It means you just didn't love them hard enough. Like if you just doubled down on your devotion, the insurmountable problems will just magically evaporate.
But the reality that clinical observation bears out is starkly different. Love, as an emotional state, cannot fix fundamental value incompatibility.
It can't cure deep-seated addiction.
No. Love cannot rewire a personality disorder. And most importantly, love cannot negotiate with active abuse. Believing that it can creates a profound martyr complex.
Because the cultural narrative whispers that enduring suffering is a noble act, and that true devotion requires endless self-sacrifice.
So we end up treating endurance as a metric for love. People stay in dynamics that are actively eroding their sanity because leaving would mean admitting their love wasn't powerful enough to perform a miracle.
They think, if I am just endlessly forgiving, if I never enforce a boundary, the purity of my love will eventually reform them.
But sacrificing your psychological safety and your self-worth is not a demonstration of love. It is an exercise in self-destruction.
Such a powerful distinction.
A sustainable partnership is maintained by mutual respect, shared core values, effective conflict resolution, and reciprocal care. Love is a necessary baseline ingredient, absolutely, but it is entirely insufficient on its own to sustain a life partnership.
And even if you manage to bypass all of those traps, right? Like, you find someone compatible, the dynamic is healthy, you aren't trauma bonding, there is still one final cultural myth that sabotages perfectly stable couples.
Ah, yes, the expectation of eternal passion.
Society aggressively markets the illusion that the obsessive, all-consuming fire of the initial infatuation phase can and should be sustained indefinitely.
The subliminal messaging is that if you aren't constantly overwhelmed by thoughts of your partner, if the initial physical urgency wanes, then the relationship is fundamentally dying.
It's so common. People hit the 2-year mark, the neurochemical cocktail settles down, they spend a Friday night quietly reading on the couch, and suddenly a profound panic sets in.
They look at the column and think, the spark is gone, we failed, I must need a new relationship.
Right, but where does that panic actually come from?
The panic stems from a total lack of biological education. The intense high of the honeymoon phase is an evolutionary mechanism designed to bond two people together quickly.
It's like a starter motor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, operating in that state of hyperfocus and intense neurochemical arousal consumes a massive amount of metabolic energy. It is biologically unsustainable.
You would literally burn out.
You would. A healthy relationship is supposed to naturally downregulate into a calmer, deeper state of attachment. The biological drivers shift from dopamine and adrenaline to oxytocin and vasopressin.
And those are the hormones that facilitate long-term pair bonding, trust, quiet intimacy.
Yes. If you are conditioned to only value the chaotic spike of the initial high, you will become a relationship tourist.
A relationship tourist, wow.
Constantly breaking up and starting over to chase a neurochemical state that is inherently designed to be temporary.
Okay, I want to pause here and introduce a bit of a counter-argument based on some of the evolutionary psychology frameworks in our source material.
Sure, let's hear it.
Because it's easy to say, well, culture brainwashed us, but isn't there a purely biological argument to be made here?
In what sense?
Doesn't the intense, chaotic dopamine hit of the chase, even with an unpredictable partner, serve an evolutionary purpose? Like, could we argue that this isn't just bad software, but actually hardwired biology designed to test the genetic fitness of a mate?
Right?
Or to ensure hyper-focus during the mating window? Are we really just victims of Disney movies, or are our brains functioning exactly how a Paleolithic environment designed them to?
That evolutionary perspective is crucial, and it doesn't negate the cultural argument, it complicates it. What you were describing is known as mismatch theory.
Mismatch theory, okay.
Yes, the dopamine reward system that drives us toward a mate is ancient and biologically hardwired. In a hunter-gatherer context, hyper-focusing on a potential mate and enduring a high-stress pursuit might have been absolutely necessary to secure a reproductive partner in a sparse population.
Right, because there were only so many people around.
Exactly. However, the evolutionary drive is solely concerned with replication and immediate survival. It does absolutely nothing to ensure long-term psychological fulfillment, emotional peace, or self-actualization over a modern 80-year lifespan.
So evolution only cares if we survive long enough to pass on our genes. It doesn't care if we are completely miserable and codependent while doing it.
Precisely the opposite of what modern humans desire. Our ancient biology provides the raw, chaotic drives, the intense spikes of dopamine, and the cortisol of uncertainty.
And then culture comes in.
Right. The cultural narratives we just discussed took those biological quirks, packaged them, and sold them to us as the ultimate meaning of life.
Wow.
So to answer your question, yes, the biological hunger is real, But to understand why we obsessively direct that hunger toward the wrong people, the people who hurt us, we have to move beyond both culture and evolutionary biology.
Where do we go then?
We dive into early childhood psychology.
So we are shifting from the external programming to the internal architecture, the foundational period.
Specifically, the developmental window from birth to roughly 7 years old. During this period, the human brain operates predominantly in theta brainwave frequencies.
Theta brainwaves. What does that mean in practice?
It is essentially a hypnotic state. The child is not critically analyzing information. They are absorbing everything in their environment as absolute, unvarnished truth. The operating system of their reality is being written in real time.
Like downloading the base code.
Exactly. And during this deeply vulnerable phase, a child's reliance on their caregivers goes far beyond just physical nourishment. Emotional survival is equally critical.
What do they need for emotional survival?
A child requires a baseline of unconditional love, physical and emotional safety, mirroring, and profound validation to develop a secure sense of self.
And the reality of the human condition is that the perfect, frictionless provision of all those emotional needs is impossible. I mean, parents are fundamentally flawed humans who are usually carrying the unresolved weight of their own childhood traumas.
That's the tragic cycle. Even in environments free from overt abuse, severe emotional deficits can occur. A parent might be physically present, but emotionally entirely unavailable due to depression or financial stress.
Or love might have been strictly conditional, like withheld when the child expressed anger or sadness, and only deployed when the child was compliant, quiet, or high-achieving.
Exactly. When these fundamental emotional needs are neglected, the psychological development surrounding that specific need basically halts. A fragment of the psyche, the inner child, becomes frozen in time, carrying a massive aching deficit of unmet needs.
So the physical body ages. We go to college, we get mortgages, we manage teams at work. We project the image of a functioning adult.
But internally,
Internally, the emotional steering wheel is frequently seized by a traumatized 7-year-old trying to get their needs met.
and that frightened inner child is constantly, desperately trying to extract that missing unconditional love from adult romantic partners.
We don't even realize we're doing it.
No, it's completely unconscious. We unknowingly project our unmet childhood needs onto the people we date. We aren't actually assessing them as an equal partner.
We're subconsciously auditioning them for the role of the replacement parent.
Yes, hoping they will finally provide the specific emotional rescue we lacked decades ago.
This mechanism leads directly into a psychological concept that is both incredibly illuminating and honestly deeply unsettling. The architecture of the subconscious, often referred to as the shadow self.
The concept of the shadow is foundational to understanding self-sabotage. The shadow is essentially the psychological repository of every aspect of ourselves that we deem unacceptable or that causes us unbearable pain.
What's in there exactly?
It contains our repressed traumas, our profound fears of abandonment, our unresolved grief, and our deeply internalized toxic shame. When a child experiences an event too painful to process consciously, such as severe rejection or abuse, the psyche must protect itself from shattering.
Right, it has to survive.
It does this through the mechanism of repression. It forces the agonizing emotion out of conscious awareness and buries it in the dark.
Okay, let me offer an analogy to ground this, because this is dense.
Please do.
Think of your conscious mind as the main living area of a house, and the shadow is the basement. You experience profound pain, you realize it's completely overwhelming, so you literally drag that pain down the stairs, throw it in the basement, lock the heavy door, and throw away the key.
A perfect visualization.
You return to the living room and tell everyone, I'm perfectly fine, I've moved on. But the reality of the shadow is that it doesn't just sit in the dark, gathering dust, right?
Far from it.
It is down there lifting weights, it is metabolizing energy, growing stronger, and eventually it starts secretly rewiring the electricity of the entire house from below.
That analogy perfectly captures the dynamic. The repressed material does not remain dormant. It becomes highly active. But because it is exiled from the conscious mind, it falls entirely under the jurisdiction of the subconscious.
And the subconscious is vastly more powerful than conscious willpower.
Immensely more powerful. It operates continuously, directing our lives from behind the curtain. It sabotages us on two distinct axes.
Horizontally and vertically, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Horizontally, it acts out in our external reality. You might inexplicably torpedo a promotion at work or violently push away a securely attached, loving partner.
And vertically.
Vertically, it severs the connection to our core essence. It keeps us emotionally numb, spiritually alienated, and entirely disconnected from our own internal intuition.
So applying this to the coffee shop parking lot from earlier, how does this invisible weightlifting basement dweller dictate the kind of chaotic people we find ourselves magnetized to?
This is where we encounter the mechanism of repetition compulsion.
Repetition compulsion.
It is the subconscious drive to recreate the exact conditions of our original childhood trauma. We subconsciously scan the environment and are fiercely attracted to partners who perfectly, uncannily mirror the unhealed wounds we carry.
To the conscious mind, this makes zero logical sense. I mean, if you grew up terrified of an unpredictable, raging parent, the conscious mind's mandate is, I will never let someone yell at me like that.
Right.
Why would the subconscious actively bypass safe people to lock onto an unpredictable, raging partner? It seems like a fundamental glitch in our survival software.
It seems like a glitch if you assume the brain's primary goal is immediate comfort. But the deeper psychological framework suggests the psyche's ultimate goal is integration and healing.
Oh.
The subconscious realizes that the trauma trapped in the basement is killing you slowly. To heal it, the trauma must be brought back into the conscious light.
So it orchestrates a reenactment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It orchestrates a precise recreation of the original wounding environment, effectively setting a stage. It casts a partner who plays the role of the wounding parent.
And what's the subconscious logic there?
The logic is, if I can recreate the exact dynamic, but this time, as an adult, I can force this emotionally unavailable, damaging person to finally love me. It will retroactively prove that I was always worthy and the original wound will be healed.
Wow. It is a tragically flawed strategy. You are attempting to extract the cure from the exact type of poison that made you sick in the first place.
And in the process of enduring this recreation, people often descend into a state the clinical literature refers to as the frozen zone.
The frozen zone, that sounds intense. What is it?
It is a severe state of psychological dissociation. It manifests when an individual is subjected to prolonged emotional neglect, systemic gaslighting, or chronic abuse.
Because you can't live in a panic attack forever.
Right. The human nervous system can only sustain a state of acute panic for so long before it has to shut down to conserve resources. In the frozen zone, the cognitive pathways remain intact, like you can objectively state the facts of what your partner said or did yesterday.
But the emotional pathways are severed.
Entirely severed. You are completely disconnected from the somatic impact of the abuse. The pain receptors are turned off.
I want to use a medical analogy instead of the usual cliches here. It's like administering a psychological nerve block.
That's very accurate.
If a surgeon cuts into a patient's leg, the patient can see the scalpel moving. They cognitively know a trauma is occurring to the tissue, but because the spinal block has severed the communication between the leg and the brain, they feel absolutely no pain.
Yes.
In a toxic relationship, the emotional spinal cord is blocked so the person can survive the daily incisions.
That is exactly the mechanism at play. It is a brilliant, desperate survival strategy deployed by the brain. But the fatal consequence of this nerve block is that the individual loses access to their emotional alarm system.
Because negative emotions aren't just bad feelings, they're data.
Exactly. Emotions like anger, disgust, and fear are evolutionary signals designed to tell us that a boundary is being violated and we are in danger. When you are numb to those signals, you cannot defend yourself.
And in abusive dynamics, the aggressor rarely obliterates boundaries all at once. They do it incrementally.
The frog in boiling water effect. A subtle devaluing comment here. An unreasonable restriction there. Because the victim is operating in safe mode, disconnected from their internal alarms, they don't register the escalating threat.
They just continuously adapt, rationalizing unacceptable behavior until they are entirely subjugated, living inside a reality that their untraumatized self would have recognized as a total horror story.
It is the systemic, methodical deconstruction of a human being's identity, and they remain in it, anesthetized, while their subconscious frantically continues to try and solve a puzzle from 20 years ago.
Man, to truly understand how this dynamic locks two people together so tightly, we have to examine the fundamental energy states we operate within. We need to analyze the structural imbalance of yin and yang energies within the psyche.
Moving from the subconscious drives to the broader energetic framework provides a really crucial lens. The concepts of yin and yang are ancient, but their application to modern psychological trauma is profoundly revealing.
And we must establish an absolute baseline immediately here. When we use terms like feminine energy and masculine energy in this context, we are speaking purely about energetic qualities and archetypal forces.
Yes, thank you. This has absolutely zero correlation to biological sex, gender identity, or societal roles.
Every single human being, regardless of how they present or identify, requires a balanced integration of both yin and yang to function as a healthy organism. It is an internal ecosystem.
Exactly. So let's delineate the mechanics of these energies. Yin, the feminine principle, is the energy of being.
Being, like resting.
Right. It correlates closely with the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. It governs love, intuition, vulnerability, the capacity to nurture, deep connection to the internal emotional landscape, and the ability to receive.
It is the foundational, quiet, internal space from which all true creativity springs, like the root system of a tree, invisible, deep, and anchoring.
Beautifully said. And Yang, the masculine principle, is the energy of doing. It maps to the sympathetic nervous system, the state of action and mobilization.
Getting things done.
Yes, it governs logic, reason, forward momentum, boundary setting, conquest, external manifestation, and physical productivity. It is the energy required to project intentions out into the material world.
So it's the branches and leaves reaching upward and outward. Now, taking an objective look at modern hyper-capitalist society, it is blatantly obvious which of these energies is prized and which is penalized.
Completely. We live in an overwhelmingly, exhaustingly hyper-yang culture.
Value is almost exclusively attached to output. We are celebrated for relentless production, aggressive achievement, and the ability to ruthlessly execute tasks while ignoring physical and emotional fatigue.
We measure human worth by economic and social productivity. Consequently, yin energy, the acts of resting, feeling profound grief or joy, nurturing the inner world without producing a tangible result, and simply existing in stillness is heavily stigmatized.
It's frequently labeled as lazy, weak, or useless.
As a result, we are collectively conditioned to ruthlessly suppress our internal yin. We starve our own root systems.
And the psychological and physiological consequences of this starvation are catastrophic, particularly in the realm of relationships, right?
Absolutely. When an individual is entirely depleted of their internal yin, which is the fundamental wellspring of self-worth, self-soothing, and internal presence, they experience a terrifying psychic void, an echoing emptiness.
And instead of doing the difficult, culturally unsupported work of cultivating that yin internally, they attempt a shortcut.
They frantically try to source the yin energy from the external environment. They use romantic partners as emotional supply lines to pump in the love and grounding they refuse to generate themselves.
Which is the mechanical definition of codependency. You become an energetic parasite latching onto a host to extract the specific emotional energy your internal ecosystem is failing to produce.
This creates a highly predictable, almost mathematically precise algorithm for toxic attraction. People do not attract what they want. They attract the mirror image of their internal dysfunction.
Can you give an example of how that looks?
Consider an individual operating in a state of extreme pathological yang. They are entirely disconnected from their emotional core, highly aggressive, hyper-focused on external validation, and fundamentally devoid of empathy. They have an absolute deficit of yin.
And the inverse, someone operating entirely in extreme yin.
An individual trapped in extreme, unbalanced yin is utterly devoid of the yang energy required for self-protection. They possess no structural boundaries, they're incapable of decisive action, they're pathologically accommodating, and they frequently inhabit a state of chronic victimhood or severe people-pleasing. They have no armor.
So when you place these two extreme polarities in the same environment, what is the chemical reaction?
It is an immediate, violent magnetic locking. An extreme yin individual and an extreme yang individual will attract each other with terrifying accuracy because they represent the exact displaced pieces of each other's fractured psyche.
Like puzzle pieces of trauma.
Exactly. The extreme yang individual, who is often highly narcissistic or dominant, desperately requires a boundaryless host to absorb their projections and extract compliance from. The extreme yin individual desperately desires an external force to provide structure, make decisions, and grant them a false sense of security, even if that structure is a prison.
This circles back to the trauma loop. The subconscious sets the stage perfectly. And culture romanticizes this dynamic heavily. It tells us, look, the aggressive businessman is softened by the gentle, accommodating artist. They complete each other.
But the clinical reality of this collision is not completion. It is consumption.
Consumption.
It is fundamentally parasitic. When two severely imbalanced entities merge, they do not create a healthy whole. They engage in a slow, agonizing process of mutual destruction. They feed exclusively off each other's trauma.
It is an enmeshed, suffocating reality where the concept of individuality is totally obliterated. The extreme yin partner is systematically eroded, drained of their remaining vitality until they are merely an extension of the yang partner's ego.
Meanwhile, the extreme yang partner becomes increasingly rigid, paranoid, and isolated in their dominance, entirely dependent on the subservience of the yin partner to regulate their own fragile self-esteem.
It is a closed-loop system of toxicity. So, addressing the listener directly, if you are sitting in your car or walking your dog right now, and you recognize your own reflection in this dynamic, what is the protocol?
That's the terrifying part, isn't it?
Yeah. What if you realize you were driving a vehicle at 90 miles an hour with 3 blown tires, locked in a trauma loop with a partner who perfectly mirrors your deepest wounds? The instinct is to ask, how do I gently slow down, pull over, and change the tires while still keeping the relationship intact?
The clinical reality that we must confront here is deeply uncomfortable. In cases of profound structural psychological dysfunction, the gentle maintenance approach is entirely ineffective.
You can't just slap a bandage on it.
No, you cannot gently repair a system built on a fundamentally rotten foundation. Often the engine must suffer a catastrophic failure. The entire vehicle must violently break down.
That contradicts every self-help platitude we are sold. We demand the sanitized, linear healing journey. We want to read a book, do a weekend retreat, and seamlessly transition into health.
The desire for painless transformation is universal, but it ignores the sheer density of our defensive structures. There's a pervasive cultural adage designed to offer comfort during crises. You will never be given more than you can handle.
Oh, I hear that all the time.
In the context of profound psychological metamorphosis, this statement is a dangerous fallacy.
Because it implies a benevolent universe perfectly calibrating your stress levels to ensure you never actually snap.
But the truth is, sometimes you must be given significantly more than you can handle. The ego's defense mechanisms, the rationalizations, the numbing, the people-pleasing are incredibly resilient. They will continue to operate indefinitely as long as they're even marginally effective at keeping the pain at bay.
So they have to fail completely.
Yes, a person must be crushed under the weight of their own despair. The absolute undeniable failure of every single coping strategy is the only force powerful enough to shatter the hardened shell of the ego and trigger a radical, non-negotiable transformation.
The concept of hitting rock bottom. It's the terrifying intersection where the agony of remaining in the toxic loop finally mathematically outweighs the profound terror of stepping into the unknown.
Rock bottom is the collapse of the false self. Every mask you wore to survive the relationship burns away because it no longer provides safety. You are left entirely stripped, exposed to the elements of your own reality. And in the epicenter of that profound crisis, an awakening occurs.
Moving past the cliches, what actually happens in the brain and the body during this awakening? Because from everything we've read, it feels less like a peaceful enlightenment and more like a violent physical expulsion.
What emerges from the shattered ego is the shadow material we discussed earlier. But it does not just bring the repressed pain and grief. It brings the immense suppressed power that was locked in the basement with it.
The lifter of weights.
Exactly. In depth psychology, this is often conceptualized as the awakening of a fierce archetypal destroyer and creator energy. It is a primal force that violently rejects further subjugation.
It is the moment the psychological nerve block wears off, and you finally feel the pain of the scalpel. And the immediate biological response to that pain is righteous anger.
Righteous anger is the most critical component of the initial breakout. Anger is a biological mechanism designed to protect the organism. It increases peripheral blood flow, heightens focus, and floods the system with the energy required to defend physical and emotional perimeters.
I want to focus on the reality of this anger because society, particularly toward women, heavily stigmatizes it. We are conditioned to view anger as a spiritual failure, a loss of control, or something fundamentally ugly.
But in this context,
But in the context of escaping a trauma loop, anger is the ultimate bodyguard of your self-worth. It is the blaring alarm system waking you from the frozen zone to scream, I am a sovereign entity and I categorically reject this treatment.
it's life-saving.
It really is. It might look like standing in your kitchen on a Tuesday and suddenly the ability to rationalize your partner's cruelty just evaporates. You hear their words and instead of internalizing it, a wall of fire goes up. It feels completely untethered, shocking to everyone around you who relies on your compliance. But internally, it is the first time you have felt genuinely, fiercely alive in years.
It is the reanimation of the paralyzed soul. And what follows this explosive boundary setting is a massive systemic release of trapped vitality. Consider the thermodynamics of the psyche. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transferred.
Right.
If your subconscious has been utilizing 80% of your daily psychological energy simply to keep the heavy door to the basement closed, to repress the trauma, and to maintain the exhausting performance of the masks, you have only been living on the remaining 20%.
You've been running the entire house on a single backup generator.
Exactly. When the crisis forces the door open, and the truth is finally acknowledged, the immense volume of energy previously dedicated to repression is liberated. It floods back into the conscious system. This is raw, unadulterated, creative vitality.
And that energy has to go somewhere. It manifests as a sudden, undeniable compulsion to radically alter one's reality. It might channel into furious physical movement, suddenly writing pages of unfiltered truth, abruptly resigning from a soul-crushing career, or, most profoundly, looking the person who has drained you for years dead in the eye and delivering a flat, unshakable no.
The word no is a complete structural sentence. For an individual who has existed entirely in extreme boundaryless yin, articulating a boundary without apology or explanation is a revolutionary act of yang integration. It is the birth of the self.
But the fire of righteous anger cannot burn forever. It is the explosive charge required to blow the door off the hinges, but you can't live in the explosion.
No, you would burn everything down.
Right. If you stay in the anger, you just become bitter and reactive. How do we transition from the dramatic breakout to the sustainable daily practice of actually keeping the masks off?
This is the critical transition from crisis management to lifelong psychological development. The fire must be channeled into the methodical process of individuation.
Individuation. The process of becoming an indivisible, singular entity, completely unentangled from the projections of your parents, the dictates of your culture, and the manipulative demands of past partners.
It is the most courageous endeavor a human can undertake, becoming exactly who you are. To visualize the mechanics of individuation, clinical frameworks often use the model of the concentric circles of the self. Visualize 3 distinct rings nested within each other.
Like the rings of a tree or a target.
The center ring, the absolute core, represents your true essence. This is the unblemished, intuitive, highly creative, and inherently worthy self that existed before the world began assigning you value based on your compliance.
The part of the psyche that doesn't have to earn its right to exist.
Yes. Surrounding that core is the middle ring. This ring acts as the holding area for all accumulated psychological trauma. It contains the childhood neglect, the rejections, the betrayals, and the deeply internalized beliefs that you are defective or unlovable. It is a ring of profound pain that encircles your essence.
And because humans are desperate to avoid pain, we construct a defensive perimeter.
That perimeter is the outer ring. This ring consists entirely of the masks, the false selves, and the behavioral adaptations we construct to interact with society. The primary function of the outer ring is to ensure that the external world never penetrates deeply enough to touch the agonizing wounds in the middle ring.
So we develop the people-pleaser mask to proactively manage everyone's emotions, ensuring we are never subjected to the wound of rejection. We develop the overachiever mask to guarantee external applause, preventing the wound of worthlessness from being triggered. We operate almost entirely from the superficial outer ring, mistaking our defense mechanisms for our actual personality.
The tragedy of the unexamined life is that the outer ring eventually becomes a prison. True healing, the core mechanism of individuation, is the terrifying process of intentionally dismantling the outer ring.
Taking off the armor.
You must voluntarily peel away the masks that have kept you safe. You must then consciously step into the middle ring and tolerate the agonizing discomfort of sitting with your own wounds. You have to encounter the terrified inner child and finally provide the unconditional presence, validation, and structural safety that they were denied in the past.
You have to become the parent you never had. But doing that requires a conceptualization of self-love that is radically different from what culture sells us. The market has commodified self-love into consumerism, buying a luxury bath bomb, having a glass of wine, or taking a spa day. Those are acts of self-soothing, but they don't heal the middle ring.
True self-love is not aesthetic. It is structural. It is radical self-respect.
Yeah.
It demands that you become the fiercest protector of your own internal ecosystem. It means developing an internal locus of validation that is so robust and impenetrable that the shifting opinions, rejections, or praises of the external world simply bounce off your hull.
The transformation is sweeping. When you stop operating from the masks, your tolerance for superficial transactional connections drops to zero. You stop performing to earn applause because your worth is entirely self-generated. You establish a closed-loop system of internal power, and suddenly, every choice you make, the career you pursue, the friendships you invest in, the partners you entertain, is dictated purely by your authentic joy and intuition, rather than a subconscious mandate to repeat a trauma loop.
That is the ultimate goal.
The theory is beautiful, but let's introduce a very real, very terrifying friction point that listeners are undoubtedly feeling right now. If the path to healing requires becoming this fiercely autonomous, boundary-enforcing, radically authentic entity, what is the cost?
The fear of isolation.
Exactly. The fear is that if you drop the accommodating masks, you will intimidate everyone. You will lose your social currency. Does the psychological mandate to find yourself inherently require you to accept a life of profound isolation? Does prioritizing autonomy mean sacrificing the possibility of romantic connection?
That is the ultimate fear of the ego, and it is the exact fear that keeps millions of people perpetually trapped in the outer ring of performance. But the clinical outcome of successful individuation provides a definitive answer. No,
Okay, good.
it does not require you to abandon connection. It requires you to abandon infantile parasitic connection. It requires the absolute destruction of relationships that demand you shrink, perform, or sever parts of your soul to secure attachment.
You lose the people who are only attached to your mask, which feels like a loss but is actually a liberation.
Exactly. When you are operating from your unblemished core, deeply anchored in your inherent worth, the fundamental mathematics of your attraction shift. You no longer survey the dating pool, desperately searching for a half orange to plug your psychological voids.
Because you aren't a half anymore.
Right. Because attracts, on a subconscious level, a fully individuated person naturally repels those who seek to consume and naturally draws in other sovereign, whole individuals who've also traversed their own shadow.
You attract another complete system.
And when two complete systems interface, you achieve the ultimate psychological goal of partnership: interdependence. This is vastly different from codependence, where two broken systems siphon energy from each other to survive. And it is different from hyper-independence, which is just a trauma response where you build a fortress and refuse to let anyone in.
What does interdependence look like?
Interdependence is a conscious, voluntary choice between two autonomous, self-sustaining individuals to share their surplus abundance. They walk side by side, profoundly enriching each other's reality without ever compromising their own structural integrity or individual trajectory.
It transforms love from a frantic hostage situation born of deficit into a calm, joyful partnership born of surplus. And if we zoom out to look at the macro-level implications of everything we've discussed today, it forces a massive retroactive paradigm shift regarding our own pasts.
It demands that we recontextualize every ounce of pain.
Because it means that the agonizing journey, the suffocating anxiety in that coffee shop parking lot, the years lost to unpredictable partners, the crushing despair of the engine finally blowing was never actually about the toxic exes. They were not the main characters of your story.
They were merely the catalysts. The chaotic consuming dynamics were essentially an evolutionary initiation. They were brutal, unavoidable invitations, meticulously orchestrated by your own psyche to force your conscious mind to look inward.
A wake-up call.
Every single conflict, every boundary violated, every tear shed over an individual who was fundamentally incapable of loving you properly was a massive signpost pointing directly back to the abandoned territory of your own soul. The pain was not a punishment for being flawed. It was life's relentless mechanism demanding that you stop outsourcing your worth and finally access your own latent power.
The pain was the alarm clock ringing until you finally woke up. It is a staggering realization to understand that your subconscious was willing to drag you through hell just to introduce you to yourself. So as we wrap up our analysis today, I want to leave you, the listener, with a specific, provocative thought to carry with you.
And it's an important one.
Consider the sheer volume of psychological energy, the unyielding loyalty, the immense capacity for forgiveness, and the fierce, breathtaking dedication you have historically poured into loving people who are structurally designed to break you. What would actually happen if, starting this very moment, you gathered up all of that staggering devotion, pulled it back from the external world, and finally, unapologetically, directed it toward your own core? You are not just walking this earth to endure a survival test in search of a great love story. The fundamental architecture of your psychology suggests you are here to actually become one.